Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing a ranking of all of the Smite 2 gods in the current alpha build, how their changes have gone from Smite 1 to Smite 2. Do they improve the god? Do they make them more fun? Do they make them more interesting? Do they make them worse in any way? Because I think there are definitely some big hitters and some big missers, honestly, with these changes going into Smite 2 so far. So let's start it off with Anubis. So, not really a whole lot has changed with Anubis. His passive changed a little bit. He no longer gets, like, bonus healing from lifesteal. He just gets more lifesteal the more low health he gets. They also changed the protections to be a percent increase on protections, which I think is a little weird because like tank Anubis isn't going to be a thing just because of this, and it really just kind of like nerfs his passive in a way. You also no longer get the CCR. I believe CCR is not even a stat in Smite 2 as far as I'm aware at the moment in terms of getting it on items or anything, but you no longer get the CCR from the passive either, so the passive is like a bit of a side grade, honestly. Like it is more useful to a certain extent, especially in the early game before you get your lifesteal online, because you just get free lifesteal rather than getting like a boost to your healing from lifesteal, which means you're kind of forced to build lifesteal on Anubis. But that was kind of his identity anyway. Like, he uses lifesteal to sustain himself because he's very vulnerable. Other than that, the only other change Anubis got, I believe, going into Smite 2 was his ult getting that, like, initial burst of damage, which is definitely an improvement. It does feel at the moment a little bit like the ticks on Anubis ult really don't do a whole lot. They don't seem to, like, chunk as much as they did in Smite 1 because of that initial burst, but you do get a lot of damage on that initial burst, and it makes it, you know, easier to confirm some of Anubis' damage rather than having to keep them CC for, like, the full 3 seconds of the ult going off, or, like, 2.4 seconds. So, overall, I think I would have to say Anubis' changes are probably like maybe B tier. They're not particularly negative, I wouldn't say, whereas like C tier is going to be mostly reserved for like negative or just changes that don't make any impact whatsoever. Anubis' changes were fine. I think a lot more could have been done with him, and a lot more has been done with some of these other gods that make them more interesting. Anubis' changes were just very mid, in my opinion. But moving on to Athena. So Athena got mostly a bunch of minor changes really going into Smite 2. So they allowed her passive reach basic attacks to proc item effects and crit, which is quite cool. They also moved the block stacks from like hitting people with her 1 to now you can get block stacks from your reach basic attacks. And then the big major change for Athena going into Smite 2 is that her ult now gives a damage shield on the ally instead of damage mitigation, which I think is a really good change overall. Because this really, it can be used to save allies a lot more frequently now. You know, if someone's on like 20-30% health, it's actually worth Athena ulting them now because you give them that big fatty shield of like 250 plus 12.5% of Athena's max health, which can be absolutely huge. So that's definitely a positive change in my opinion. It makes Athena a little bit more of like a reactive save people kind of ability rather than a preemptive, I'm just going to use this for global rotation kind of ability, and I think that's a positive change. But ultimately, Athena didn't really get too much. She's not like a radically different god or made much more interesting or anything, so I think I will also throw Athena's changes to B tier. Maybe as we go through this, it could move up to A tier, because I think this is an upper B tier placement for Athena, if anything. Maybe we'll rank them in order, honestly, so we'll put Athena above Anubis. Because I really do like the change that they made where her ult is now a shield. I think that's much better. Moving on to Bacchus, though. So Bacchus really didn't get a whole lot. The main thing he got was that when he uses his 1, he gets like an extra big burst of damage based on his protections on his next slap after chugging. I think that is a really cool change. I do like it a lot. But other than that, Bacchus didn't really get too much. Everything else is pretty much the same. You got some, like, game-wide changes in terms of, like, his belly flop now scales from strength and does physical damage. And I will be taking that into consideration in terms of, does it, like, radically change the god's playstyle and the way they build? Does it make them more interesting? With Bacchus, it doesn't really do too much. Like, mostly you're going to be building tank on him anyway, and it's not really worth, like, slamming a ton of strength on him just so you can do more damage with belly flop. So, ultimately, it doesn't really change anything. The main change for Bacchus is that after his chug, he gets a 60% of his protections on his big next slap. And so overall, I think I'll also throw Bacchus into the C tier, but he's definitely on the lower end of C tier, in my opinion. Better than Anubis? Probably not, I would say. They're about on the same level. Definitely not as good as Athena's changes so far. Moving on to Bellona, though. So Bellona basically just got a few very minor changes. Bellona doesn't play any different. She doesn't really... Obviously, she builds different, but she's still just like a normal strength-based attack speed character that will build tank. So like, in terms of her overall playstyle and build style, it hasn't really changed from Smite 1. The main thing she got is that her passive now does different things based on which weapon you have. So you'll get the protections from Sword and Shield, you'll get percent strength from the hammer, and you'll get attack speed from the Scourge. And they also changed her Scourge to be just healing on every single auto attack rather than every 3 auto attacks, which is nice for consistency. And then I guess her 1 also got a little bit of protection scaling on the reflect damage, so if you're building a lot of tank, you're going to be reflecting more overall damage with her one's block stacks. And honestly, overall, I think the Bellona changes are fairly boring. I might honestly throw them to C tier. They're not particularly bad. I don't think they make the character worse, but they don't really change the way Bellona plays or the way she feels or anything. Like, it's very minor, small changes that really don't change the way Bellona works in any way. I'm not particularly opposed to what they did with Bellona, because I think Bellona already is a quite well-designed character, so I don't think she really needed anything particularly massive to, like, fit her into into Smite 2. I think she's kind of fine where she is, but in terms of the changes that were actually done, they really don't change anything, to be honest. Moving on to Cernunnos, who got some pretty interesting changes, because he's going to be a little bit of a strength and int hybrid hunter in Smite 2, so like the whole build and item system really opens up his possibilities in this game. So his one got like some major changes where like the heal scales with int, the damage on his summer stance scales with strength or int, whichever is higher. The debuffs for the fall protections and also the winter slow will scale with intelligence now, which is really interesting. And then he's got like hybrid scaling and hybrid damage on some of his other abilities as well. Like his 2 is going to deal magical damage, his 3 is going to deal physical damage, and this will scale mostly with int, but a little bit with strength, and this will scale entirely with strength. So I think it's definitely interesting what they've done with Cernunnos. He's going to be one of like the premier hybrid strength and int hunters. It doesn't really change his playstyle too much. He's going to play mostly the same, but his builds are going to be very interesting in terms of like you probably want to slot in a good amount of int into his builds to get value off of like the fall protection shred, off of like the winter slow here, some more healing from the spring stance, and obviously you get big damage on the ult for building it, big damage on the 2 for building it, and stuff like that. So his builds are much more interesting. I think he is a more interesting character in Smite 2 for sure. But ultimately, I think big playstyle shifts and making the gods more interesting in the way they play is generally better than just like changing up their build paths and working them into the strength and intelligence system, which is kind of what they've done with Cernunnos. So overall, I think I'll put him above Anubis and Bacchus, but below Athena, because they didn't really get any like major kit changes. It's just the way his ability scale is a little bit different and more interesting now. Moving on to Chaac, though. So Chaac really is a similar case to Cernunnos, but a little bit less extreme. He didn't really get any major kit changes, honestly. He's just been ported over to work with the strength and intelligence system. It's cool that like his rain scales with int now, whereas in Smite 1 it doesn't scale with anything, obviously, because they hated healing in Smite 1. So you can get a little bit of heal scaling with the int. You can get more protections by building int on the 2. You get 4% of your intelligence added onto that protection buff, which is really cool. His ult scales with both kinds pretty effectively. Definitely better with intelligence, but it does scale with a bit of strength as well, which you're probably going to be wanting some strength for like his 2, which scales only with strength, and his 1 that scales pretty well with strength as well. Ultimately, though, Chaac didn't really get anything too crazy. And so I think I'm probably going to throw Chaac into... Does he belong in C tier? It's either C tier or bottom end of B for me. I guess I'll throw in bottom end of B. He does like play and build quite differently in Smite 2, but that's like kind of obvious. Like a lot of gods are going to play and build very differently in Smite 2, and that's kind of like the only thing that changed with him really. He doesn't really have any like major kit or playstyle changes. Moving on to Fenrir. So Fenrir got some pretty interesting changes actually. I do like Fenrir's changes overall. So they made it so that if you're not at 5 runes with your 1, you're going to gain 3 runes, and then also you gain 1 rune per successful hit of his 3. So he has much more easy access to rune generation to use those enhanced rune effects much more easily, which I think really does smooth out the way he plays. I think it's definitely a lot better. And then these 3, obviously they allowed it to essentially be auto attacks again like it was in the early days of Smite 1. So this thing can now proc item effects like Executioner, it can crit, it can do all this crazy stuff. One slight negative that may be a bug at this time, I'm not entirely sure, is that Fenrir can bite instantly after he presses the key for his ult. There's not like that delay of when he grows big and then he can bite in Smite 1. He can just do it instantly in this game. And that is really frustrating to play into, personally. So unless if that's a bug, then great, and it'll get fixed. If it's not a bug, I think it should be changed to have a little bit of a delay on it. But other than that, Fenrir's change is absolutely great in my opinion. Let's put him on the tier list. I think Fenrir goes to probably A tier. Like, there's not anything super groundbreaking. He still plays mostly the same, but he has a lot more intrigue in his kit now. He's got freer access to generating runes. Brutalize, being able to create and proc item effects, makes his builds really interesting. Overall, I really like the Fenrir changes. Moving on to Hades, who is new for Alpha 2, and I think also has some great changes. So yeah, Hades doesn't really have any major changes to his base kit. The only thing that really got changed with him is the ult, but it's such a major change that fundamentally changes the way Hades plays that I actually do like a lot. And of course, this is that Hades can now use 1 of his 3 basic abilities without taking the cooldown during his ultimate, and that is really interesting to me. It's sort of like a bit of a trade-off, you know. Mostly the 1 and the 2 work similarly because you can ult and 2 someone and that will silence or fear them and keep them in the ult for a longer duration, or you can use the 1 to like after they've used their dash to get away from your ult, you 1 and follow them and burn them with the rest of the ult. But they do have slightly different applications. Like with the 2, for example, they're CC'd completely, so it makes it much easier for your allies to follow up with abilities rather than just like letting them use their movement ability and following them with the dash. But then of course you've got the 3, like if you've already burnt their dash and you don't think they're gonna have any way out of it, you can just fully commit to using the 3 and just absolutely nuking them in your ult. I think it's super interesting. Definitely changes the way Hades plays a lot, and while Hades didn't get any other changes really, it's still just a full int-based character. He doesn't really change in any way other than this ult change. The ult change is so cool that I think it like warrants a very high placement. The question is he gonna go to S tier or A tier? And honestly I think he has to go to S tier. Like that ult change is just so impactful and really changes the way Hades plays and makes him actually actually kind of a late game monster, which may be a little bit scary for balance reasons, because of course his laning phase is still absolutely incredible. So if he's got a good laning phase and a really good late game with a lockdown that he now has during his ultimate, that could become a balance problem later down the line. But at least for the moment, this is so much fun to use. I really like it a lot. Moving on though to Kukulkan, who didn't really get too much major in terms of changes. His builds don't change too much. And when I say that, obviously I've said that a few times. What I mean by that is that he's still going to be building full int like he would be building full magical power in Smite 1. It hasn't really changed in terms of like, is he a hybrid character? Can he like work tank now or whatever? So other than that, he's really not changed at all, other than his 2, which I think is a really interesting change. So if he's in the whirlwind, he can now use his 2 as like a fairly long range dash. I think that is really interesting. It kind of adds to his like turtle playstyle that he kind of had a little bit, where like his ult hits behind him a little bit. He can throw a tornado on himself to sort of self-peel. And it really just adds to that aspect of like diving onto Cuckoo is actually a little bit scary, because you can pop his whirlwind on you and they can dash out of the whirlwind, which roots you and keeps you in the whirlwind. I think it makes him a lot more interesting. It is only one change, and it's not quite as major as the Hades change in my opinion, but I think I'm still going to throw him to A tier just for that single change. I think it makes him a lot more interesting. Moving on to Loki though. So Loki, once again, didn't really get anything too major other than one change, which is that killing a god immediately refreshes the cooldown of Vanish. This is a pretty major change. Vanish is very important to Loki's game plan, and it allows you to sort of... It doesn't just change the fact that you have Vanish available more often, it actually allows you to engage with Vanish, which is usually not what you would want to do with Loki in Smite 1. You would want to be blinking or ulting to engage, because you kind of want to have Vanish available as a fallback if you get caught out. Whereas now, if you fully believe you can get that kill, you can actually use Vanish as the engage, and it's actually probably better to do that, because again, you can save your ults for like chasing their movement ability, or save your blink for like chasing their movement ability or whatever. Because if you know you can reliably get that kill and you have Vanish available again, you can easily disengage or like re-engage with Vanish after the fact. And I think it's a really interesting change. One thing I do wish they would have done with Loki though is give him a little bit more int scaling. Like, he is the trickster. I think some int scaling on like scaling up the like, you know, blind duration or like the damage dealt reduction or something on his 2 with int could be kind of cool. I think something to do with int would have been cool for Loki, so I'm a little bit disappointed that he didn't do that. But I do like the Vanish change overall. I think it makes him a lot more interesting. So I think we'll probably throw Loki to at least B tier. I don't think it's quite interesting enough to throw him up to A tier in my opinion, but it's probably better than like all of these. Maybe better than Athena, honestly. Actually, no, I'll put him slightly below Athena purely because I do wish they added some kind of int scaling to his kit. I think it would be interesting with that. Next up is Neith, and Neith got some really cool changes. I think Neith is honestly the best feel god in Smite 2 at the moment. Like, she feels absolutely amazing. I've got a gameplay coming out on my second channel for her today, probably. And she just feels amazing to play. Like, all of her animations match up really well. She just feels great. So the major, like, kit change that they made to Neith is that they've shifted the weed generation from the 3. It is now going to be on the 2. And that is actually a bigger change than it sounds like. Because now you can, like, 2 the wave and then 1 it and you get that thing. You can 2 an enemy for poke. And then if they stay around in that general area, you can hit them with the 1 and do a big root explosion. It definitely does make her feel a lot better to play. And also, you don't have to use your movement ability to get that big damage off. And a lot of noob Neiths, they will just run up and backflip to try and get a weave down and detonate it. And then they've used their movement ability, they get jumped on and they die. So it's definitely going to be a lot better for, like, noob Neith players as well. They added a little bit of a stacking int and attack speed for detonating weaves, which is not really overall that relevant. They also made the 3 consume the weaves now to heal you, compared to, like, the 2. The 2 doesn't do it anymore. And, of course, the major sort of non-kit change, but sort of a kit change as well, is that Neith is an intelligence user in Smite 2, or at least can be. You could probably still build her strength with attack speed and crit and stuff, and she'd probably still work that way, but I think the best way to build her is going for, like, an intelligence nuke build, which essentially turns her into, like, a Smite 1 mage, and I think that's really interesting, because that's kind of always what she's been. She's just been a physical mage. And she does still have decent strength scaling. You know, the 1 is basically about even. It's 100% strength and 50% int, but because int is about 2 times as available as strength, the scaling is about even there. And so generally for, like, abilities hitting harder, you're better off going int, but you can still throw a bit of strength in there, because she does have 100% strength scaling on her ult and 100% strength scaling on her 1, so throwing a little bit of strength in there is absolutely fine as well. And of course, strength contributes 100% to your basic attacks, whereas int only contributes 20% to your basic attacks. So if you are throwing a little bit of strength in there, you're going to be doing a lot more auto attack damage. I think these build paths and playstyles are so much more interesting in Smite 2 than they were in Smite 1, and overall her kit changes are absolutely great. I think she's one of the greatest showcases of the strength and int system as well. And for that reason, I'm going to throw these to A tier, I think. She's not quite S, because she didn't get any, like, major kit changes that completely change her playstyle, like with Hades, but she absolutely is one of the best showcases of strength and int, and also, like, the overall kit changes she made, like moving the weaves to the 2, allowing the 3 to consume them to heal her and stuff like that. Does she go above Fenrir? I think she probably does. Neith feels absolutely amazing in Smite 2, honestly. Moving on to Odin, though. So Odin didn't really get anything too major in terms of, like, playstyle shifts. He still plays exactly the same. He's got a little bit of a mix of, like, int scaling and magical damage and strength scaling and physical damage throughout his abilities, which is interesting. They also gave him a 40% cooldown reduction flat on his 3 if you use it after the first pulse only, which really incentivizes using that attack speed, and is honestly quite overpowered, if anything, but that's pretty cool as well. But yeah, other than that, they really didn't do too much with Odin. He's pretty much the same god. He just has a little bit of different scalings, a little bit of different damage types using the Smite 2 system, but he's not honestly the best user of it, and honestly, a lot of his animations look kind of weird in Smite 2. He doesn't feel great to play. So overall, I think Odin might be our second C tier. Probably better than Bellona, because Bellona really didn't get anything that changes her playstyle whatsoever, whereas at least Odin can now be a bit of a hybrid, and there's something to think about in terms of how do you want to build. You know, do you want strength, do you want int, do you want tank? There's all that kind of stuff to think about, and it makes him a little bit more interesting, whereas Bellona is, she builds mostly the same in terms of she's just going to want strength and attack speed and tank. Moving on, though, we have Sol, who is another of the new, the 2 new gods. Sol and Hades came in Alpha 2. Sol didn't really get anything too major. They basically added a explode damage on her 3, so when you go immune, if any enemies are still in the trail, they're going to take a big burst of damage. It's like 300 plus 75% of him, which is really big. They also made her 1 have a much larger radius depending on your heat. It goes up to 2.5 times the radius if you're at maximum heat, which is pretty cool as well. I haven't really experimented too much with Sol in terms of build pass, but I imagine her build pass are opened up quite a lot by the Smite 2 system. Obviously in Smite 1, she was just a magical ADC, and she just used a very specific limited pool of magical ADC items for the most part. But Sol was still viable, and it's probably still viable in Smite 2 as well. But yeah, her item pool was a little bit limited, whereas now her item pool is extremely expansive. Because she obviously wants int, all of her abilities scale with int, so you're going to be doing a lot of ability damage if you build that, but she also might want a little bit of strength in there as well, because that's going to scale your autos much more effectively than your int. You also want attack speed, you might want some utility stats, so her build paths are actually going to be really interesting, I think. I've not experimented a whole lot with it in terms of like what she can get away with, but I think it is going to be quite interesting, her using the Smite 2 item system. But the lack of any major kit changes is kind of sad for me. Like, I almost wish they brought back her 2 counting as a basic attack. I think that would have been kind of interesting. So overall, I think I'll just throw Sol 2 B tier, maybe above Chaac. I don't think, maybe above Bacchus as well. In fact, probably above Anubis. Yeah, that's probably where she sits, I think, for me. Next up, Ymir. So Ymir's major kit change is obviously the wall. They made it so the wall can now displace enemies, knocks them away a little bit. You can use it on yourself. I think it's a really interesting change. It's fairly small, but it does add a little bit of life to Ymir. You can use your wall in different ways now, which I think is really cool. And of course, the thing everyone's talking about, Frostbite now adds 185% of your strength to your basic attacks instead of just doubling the damage. But also, Ymir can now build crit because of the new item system, which is kind of crazy. We've had a little bit of time to explore it now, and honestly, I think it is kind of a meme. Like, it's very good mid-game. I've been absolutely blown up by crit Ymirs in the mid-game, but by the time you get to late-game, you just can't really get on someone and stay on them long enough to, like, properly burst them down. You just end up dying, because if you're going for, like, full crit Ymir, you're not tanky at all. So I think it is kind of a meme, but it is pretty funny. But ultimately, I think Ymir will end up in a place very similar to Smite 1 in terms of he's just going to be built tank for the most part. I don't think it's actually fully viable to go maximum strength crit chance Ymir. So overall, I think Ymir's changes are pretty mid as well. They didn't really change too much. I do like the wall change, though, so I'll probably put him in, like, the upper end of mid. He probably belongs, like, maybe even above Athena, honestly. It depends on how much you like the wall change versus Athena's ult change. Personally, I think it makes more of an impact on his gameplay, so we'll put him here. And finally, at least for Alpha 2, maybe I'll end up remaking this video at some point, like a few alphas down the line when we've got a bunch more gods in the game. The god pool is currently a bit limited, but we have Zeus as our final one to talk about. So other than being able to use the new item system and being able to build crit and stuff and utilize that damage increase on his overcharge with crit, which is kind of funny, probably not ultimately the best way to do him, but you can do that. The major kit change that Zeus got was the 2 changing. He's no longer going to have the shield, he's going to have this thunderclap ability, which is going to give you increased movement speed, attack speed, and reduced basic attack movement penalty. This absolutely changes Zeus's playstyle quite a lot. He's much more of a, like, kind of in there type of god now, whereas in Smite 1 he is very much a out of there type of god. He wants to be as far away from you as possible, just throwing out the shield and try to chain lightning into the backline. And it honestly harkens a little bit back to the Smite 1 days of Zeus when you had the Aegis shield effect, which allowed you to get in there a little bit more. I think it had a reflect damage and also applied charges to people that were hitting you with basic attacks and also gave you increased movement speed and stuff like that. And personally, I really like this playstyle for Zeus. I think this is super good. I really like this ability change. I have heard a lot of people complaining about it though and saying that it doesn't really fit with Zeus's playstyle. Maybe it's because I played Zeus back in the old days when this kind of was how he played a little bit, like a little bit more in there. Personally, I prefer it, but I kind of get it if you got really used to Smite 1 Zeus as playing like as a super far back, like almost artillery mage style character that's just throwing out shields and poking people. And since this is my personal list, I am going to throw Zeus to A tier. Probably just above Kukulkan, but behind Fenrir in my opinion. I really do like his new ability. I think it's very interesting, and I do prefer his playstyle with it. But I can see the argument that, like, it does fundamentally change his playstyle, and if you enjoyed the old poke style of Zeus rather than the all-in style that he has now, I can understand why you might not like the change. But yeah, there you go. That is my thoughts on a ranking for all of these changes so far, going from Smite 1 to Smite 2 in the alpha. Hades, absolute best change, completely changes the way he plays in team fights. I think it's absolutely great. And then Odin and Bellona basically didn't get changes. All they do is like move to the new item system. Let me know your own thoughts down below. What is your personal favorite change that they've made so far? Is it Hades? Is it not Hades? And let me know some of your like least favorite ones as well. And I will catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day. Enjoy the Smite 2 alpha, and peace out, you nerds.